So today we're going to crack open the researcher's toolkit. Think of it like a toolbox for a master craftsperson, but instead of hammers and saws, it's jam-packed with these really powerful methods for finding answers to just about anything.
I mean, it's a huge question, right? Whether you're a scientist, you're running a business, or you're just a curious person, this is where it all starts. How do you go from just a hunch, a feeling, to a conclusion you can actually stand behind? Well, that whole journey, it always begins with gathering the right information.
And that's exactly what this is all about. You can't build a solid house with just a screwdriver, right? And you can't build a strong, convincing argument with just one type of data. The quality of the answers we get depends completely on the quality of the tools we use to find them.
All right, let's dive in. We'll start with the basics. What is data collection? Then we'll check out three main categories of tools: the ones for asking people directly, the ones for watching from a distance, and then some really specialized tools for those deep dives. And finally, we'll talk about why the real magic happens when you start combining them.
So, first things first, what exactly is data collection? Well, to put it simply, it's the bedrock of any investigation. It's that first absolutely critical step in the whole process of discovery. Now, pay attention to that word right there, systematic. Data collection isn't just, grabbing random facts from here and there. It's a deliberate, organized process. And maybe the most important thing to remember is that the tool you choose, it's always determined by the question you're trying to answer. The question always dictates the tool.
Okay, so let's grab our first set of tools from the kit and see how this works. These are what I like to call the conversational tools, the ones where you get your information straight from the source, people themselves. So here we have three classics. First up, surveys. You've probably taken a million of these. They're the perfect tool when you need to cover a lot of ground, getting a quick snapshot from tons of people, and it doesn't break the bank. The catch? They can tell you what people think, but they rarely tell you why. For that, you need interviews. This is where you go deep. You can ask follow-up questions. You can really dig into the details of someone's perspective. Sure, it takes a lot more time, but the depth you get is just incredible. And then you have focus groups. Now, these are really interesting because you're not just getting one person's opinion. You're actually seeing how ideas get bounced around, debated, and even changed within a group. It shows you social dynamics you'd completely miss otherwise.
But what if asking someone a question actually changes how they'd normally act? Yeah, that can happen. Sometimes the best way to really understand something is to just step back and watch. And that brings us to our next set of tools, the ones for observation.
The key phrase here is natural setting. Instead of pulling people into some sterile lab, you go to them. You watch how they behave in their own environment, which can give you these amazing insights you'd never get just by asking a question. And this really highlights the classic trade-off. The huge advantage is you're seeing what people actually do, not just what they say they do. But there's a catch, and it's something called the observer effect. People might just act differently because they know someone's watching them. And on top of that, the researcher has to be really careful because their own biases can easily color how they interpret what they're seeing.
But hey, observation isn't just about watching people in the moment. It can also mean looking at the tracks they leave behind. Archival research is kind of like being a detective. You're sifting through old documents and records for clues. And today, in our digital world, sensor data from our phones, from our smartwatches, that's like having a constant automated observer.
Using archives is great, it's cheap, and it can give you incredible historical context. But you are totally limited by whatever someone decided to write down in the first place, and what actually managed to survive over the years. Sensor data, on the other hand, is amazingly objective and detailed, but it definitely opens up a whole can of worms, especially when it comes to technology failing, or even more importantly, privacy. All right, let's keep going. Sometimes you need to do more than just ask or watch. Sometimes you need to step in and get your hands dirty, and that's where our specialist tools for in-depth investigations come into play. This is the classic scientific method right here. The two magic words are manipulate and controlled. See, unlike observation where you just watch the world as it is, in an experiment, you actively change one thing to see how it affects another while trying your best to keep everything else exactly the same. And the process is super disciplined. You start with a hypothesis, an educated guess, then you go in and you tweak one specific variable to test that guess. The next part is absolutely critical. You lock down all the other conditions so you know you're running a fair test. And finally, you just carefully watch and measure the result.
It's all about isolating one single relationship to see if it's real.
And this is the superpower of experiments. When you do them right, they are the only tool that lets a researcher go beyond just saying two things are related and actually establish true cause and effect. It's the difference between saying, A seems to be connected to B, in proving that A causes B. Huge difference. Another one of these specialist tools is the case study. This is when you do a super deep dive on just one single person, or one group, or one event. You get this incredibly rich, detailed picture. The major catch, though? What you learn from that one specific case might not apply to anyone else. It gives you depth, but it's very, very narrow. So we've looked at a whole range of tools now, and they all have their own pros and cons. So how does a real pro build the strongest possible case they can? Well, they don't just pick one tool from the box. They use several. And there's a great name for this expert strategy. It's called triangulation. The whole idea is that by looking at a problem from multiple angles, using different tools, you can get a much clearer, much more accurate picture of what's actually going on. Think of it this way. A survey gives you really broad but kind of shallow data. An observation might be deep, but it can be subjective. But if your survey results and your observations, and maybe even an experiment, all point to the very same conclusion, then you can be way more confident you found something real. Each method's strengths help cover for the other method's weaknesses. Let's make this real with an example. Say you want to figure out what drives workplace productivity. You could start with a survey to see how productive employees feel. Then, you could use observation to see how they're actually spending their time at their desks. And finally, you could use sensor data to track objective things like computer activity. Each tool gives you a totally different, valuable piece of the puzzle. And honestly, this is the big takeaway. By combining these methods, researchers aren't just collecting data anymore. They're building a comprehensive, multifaceted, and much, much more reliable picture of reality. It's like turning a simple pencil sketch into a full-blown, high-definition photograph. All this leaves us with a really fascinating question for the future. We've gone from just watching things with our own eyes to running complex experiments and collecting massive amounts of automated data. As technology like AI gets more and more powerful, what new tools are we going to add to the kit? What new questions will we suddenly be able to answer? That's definitely something to think about.